Hey there. Thank you so much for downloading this episode and listening to it. If you'd like to get my book, System Wisdom, or if you'd like to get the entire first season of this podcast, along with the background music that we used for this podcast, just follow the link in the episode description and you will get a 50% off discount for this quarantine period. If for whatever reason you don't see the 50% discount, when you check out, type in the code STUCK and you should get it. Here's the show. Welcome to Methodically Processing Systems. The coronavirus outbreak has ground everything to a halt. Stress oozes into life's every corner. No one knows what's going to happen next. It will take some time, but eventually we'll figure all this out. But in the meantime, things are at a standstill. We've come to a full stop because the world we've built was never designed to handle something like this pandemic. We assumed events like this were things of the past, problems for our ancestors. Not us, because after all, we're special. We are the people of the future. Over the last 80 years, there have been people who warned us. They told us our world was not well geared for massive disruptions like pandemics. They told us pandemics weren't a thing of the past. They cautioned that our more connected world left us vulnerable to pandemics. But we blew them off. We told them massive disruptions are rare. We called them pessimists. We ignored them, and we went on building a world made by optimists. These optimists existed because they lived in a special point in history. World War II had come and gone. The Cold War had ended. By the 1990s, the world was a much more optimistic place, and one by one, the people who had endured the hot and cold wars, pandemics, and the hardships of the past were swept away by time. Gradually, a new kind of person took power. They took power with a very different mindset. They had no real memories or experiences with wars, disease, and cataclysm. They didn't live their lives on the precipice of disaster. They lived in a wondrous world. These people lived in a sunny world, and all they could see, the future, was an even sunnier world. And who can blame them? It's easy to be optimistic in paradise. Their opponents had no ammunition. Who can convince people that there may be rain soon when it's clear and sunny skies? Yet, we've never left the precipice. We've only walked closer to it. When I tell you about disasters and cataclysm, you get a particular image inside your head. You might see asteroids wiping out the dinosaurs, or you might see a supervolcano spreading ashes into the sky. You might even see yourself chased by brain-eating zombies. Outrageous and exaggerated images fill your head. You're envisioning the results of cataclysm. The cataclysm itself is rarely anything like that. That's what makes them surprising. It doesn't take much for things to go sideways, even if the results end up catastrophic. The road to catastrophe is a cakewalk. Take that asteroid from your imagination, the one that could blow the Earth to smithereens. Right now, it's just an innocent chunk of rock that might have fallen out of its orbit somewhere out in space. It could just be gently tumbling towards us for millions, if not billions of years. It doesn't really take much for the whole world to go sideways. You don't need a zombie apocalypse or a killer asteroid. Something small will do just fine. We've seen major global crises in the past that started small. The 2008 financial crisis began when people who couldn't afford big loans in the form of mortgages stopped paying them. How could such a small thing as an individual not paying back their debt erase billions of dollars off the face of the earth over the course of a few months? How can something so little become something so big? It comes down to double-edged swords. They overrun our world. Everything that gives us comfort and joy can also provide us with suffering and horror. The same connectivity that lets me communicate with you through this podcast is also the same connectivity that ensures that a small mistake you make can propagate through those connections. That's what this whole coronavirus spectacle is. A threat spreading through our connected systems, through the connections within our systems. If it had started in a remote island that no one leaves or visits, it would have burned itself out, and we would never have heard about it. Instead, it exploded in one of the world's economic centers. And anyone who is anyone conducts some business in China. That means the whole world gets not just the upside from that connectivity, but also the downside. The same would have been true if the virus had cropped up in the United States, another global center for business. We're often told that our communication in this modern world is faster than ever, and usually we're told that it's a good thing. But it also means anything that can communicate, whether good or bad, can also spread faster than ever. Viruses aren't the only bad contagion. Any disruptions in a global system that is connected and networked can propagate throughout the world faster and faster than ever before. If a factory closes halfway around the world, you may not be able to get toilet paper. And the fact that you can't get toilet paper may worry you. The fact that you're worried may cause you to spend less time and less money on something like going out to the movies. And this hurts the movie industry. And the movie industry doesn't exist in isolation. Industries that depend on business from the movie industry end up being affected as well. And before you know it, the entire world is in a recession. That's how you end up here. Just 2 weeks into a quarantine, economists and financial experts come out to tell us that our modern economy cannot handle being shut down for 2 weeks. And the longer this goes on, the worse things will be. Every minor disturbance gets amplified by the duration of the lockdown. And our only way out is to stop the lockdowns. But that only invites a potentially worse outcome. Rock meet hard place. It wasn't always this way. Wherever you may live as you're listening to this podcast, the world of your ancestors was more shockproof than your world today. Their world was buffered. And don't think they were all isolated tribes. They were interconnected people. Global trade still flowed in volumes that would surprise you. But there were natural buffers that prevented runaway problems. The slower pace of communication gave dangers time to fizzle out before they had the opportunity to spread. It took ships a lot longer to cross the ocean than a giant cargo plane or a modern airliner can traverse the sky today. And just because of that slower pace, chain reactions are slowed to a crawl, and sometimes even eliminated entirely. The slower speed also meant that people learned not to depend for their survival on faraway places beyond their control. Individual villages, towns, and even cities were more self-sufficient. If you can grow your own food, draw your own water from the ground, or even produce your own energy, then you're not dependent on the connectivity for your survival. And that means that you can protect yourself better by cutting connectivity when you need to. But more importantly, it means if you do cut the connectivity, you can still survive and possibly even thrive. The world doesn't end because the world knows how to make ends meet when connectivity reduces or even stops. And depending on where you lived in the world, nature would also hurl you regular shocks that would keep you on your toes. In Northern Europe, brutal winters would regularly bring medieval civilization to a near halt. It's not an accident that Christmas season so neatly aligns with the middle of winter. If you need a 2 or 3 week period where everyone stops their economic activity, when everyone is hunkered down for the cold, it's a pretty good time. And that's exactly what would happen. The little bit of economic activity that occurred in these regions during the winter would completely cease for a full 2 weeks, ostensibly in observance of a holiday. A complete halt. Now, did the world end every winter for our medieval ancestors? No. The world of yesteryear was built to survive prolonged periods of lockdowns imposed by nature. The standstills were baked in, woven into the tapestry of society. And to be absolutely clear, this isn't just a rosy picture that I'm painting. These winters were brutal, people died. But the world was better equipped to handle the pause, even if not necessarily the winter itself. Today, we can't press pause for 2 weeks without hundreds of millions, if not billions of people becoming victims of immense misfortune. Entire economies would collapse. Some are imploding as you listen to this right now. They are failing because we've forgotten that we live on nature's turf. Our optimism got ahead of our reality. We didn't consider that we could end up here. 500 years ago, we may not have been prepared for bacterial diseases. Still, we would have been more prepared for an economic shutdown than we are today. That's something to think about and consider deeply. The people who lived long before us didn't have antibiotics or economic theory or university research. They couldn't predict daily weather using space satellites. They couldn't tell a viral pandemic from demons raining hell upon the earth. Yet, despite their primitive technology and limited factual knowledge, they were better able to absorb an economic shock than we are today. We have better technology and way more knowledge that's readily available. But not only did they survive and thrive economic shocks, but they also did it again and again. The fact that we are here shows how resilient they were, and how resilient we could be. We can achieve their resilience, and we don't need to go back to a medieval society to do that. We don't need to live exactly like our ancestors. We don't need to shun our technology and microwaves and antibiotics to achieve that. We do need to identify where we are vulnerable and remove or fix those vulnerabilities. You don't need much to identify where you are fragile. It's so easy that a child can do it. You can stress test yourself and the world around you with a simple technique developed by Nassim Taleb, Eli Kennedy, Tidiane Kinda, Elena Lukoinova, and Christian Schmieder. You can perform this test at any level, as an individual, a household, a community, a town, a city, a state, a country, or even as the whole world. Scale is not a limiting factor here. Take something, anything that you're concerned about. Say you're an employee and you're worried about getting fired for being late. How can you test whether you're fragile to being late? It's easy. Test what happens when you're regularly 5 minutes late to work or a meeting. You'll probably find that people might be mildly annoyed. Let's say that they would rate their annoyance level as 1 out of 10, with 1 being not annoyed at all and 10 being furious. So what happens when you're regularly twice as late? So 10 minutes instead of 5 minutes. Do the people around you double their annoyance rating from 1 to 2 out of 10? No. What's more likely is that they might go from 1 out of 10 to 5 out of 10 on the rating scale of their annoyance. Their negative response accelerates with every incremental increase in your lateness. If you quadruple your lateness from 5 to 20 minutes late every day, their annoyance rating won't quadruple from 1 out of 10 to 4 out of 10. It'll be more like 20 out of 10, and you'll be fired soon. Even though you're only 4 times as late, you get 20 times the negative result. You are fragile and vulnerable to anything in your life where the harm not just increases proportionally, but actually accelerates as the stressor increases. These are the vulnerabilities in your life that can make life miserable if there is the smallest shock. Let's look at another example. Take someone named Carl, who lives in San Francisco. His ludicrous rent in San Francisco is $3,500 per month. Let's say Carl's take-home pay is $5,000 per month. Carl's living a precarious financial life, as you'll see. Now, imagine Carl's take-home pay decreases by 20% to $4,000 per month. Life is going to be stressful for him, but he can cut his spending back, hopefully, and still make his rent and maybe buy some basic utilities with a helping of rice and beans for meals for the month. But let's say Carl's take-home pay decreases by twice the original amount, 40% instead of 20%. Now his take-home pay is down to $3,000 per month. Is Carl's situation twice as stressful? No. It's much, much worse. Carl can no longer pay rent, let alone buy anything else. He's a lot more stressed, and he's going to need to figure out cheaper living arrangements. This will stress him out. He might spiral into depression. He could lose his job due to all the stress and anxiety and depression. His fickle partner can't stand him the way he is and may decide to ditch him. And soon after that, Carl might turn into an alcoholic. Now he can't even get a new job. A doubling in the stressor has caused 100 times more problems in his life. And from this scenario, we can easily deduce that Carl is fragile to increasing pay cuts with his current lifestyle. If Carl had stress tested his fragility, identified the problems, and reworked his life, he wouldn't face such a tragic end. If Carl had tested his fragility while he was still in control, his story might have been different. Maybe for fun, he could have pretended to get a 20% pay cut. And then maybe, after he saw how that went, he could follow it up with a simulation of a 40% pay cut and see what happens to his life and the people around him and the environment around him. It would be a simulation to help him understand his fragilities. He'd know whether he's fragile to pay cuts. He could even identify all the things that could break before they actually end up breaking. And he could start to rearrange his lifestyle to absorb the shock of a pay cut a lot better. And maybe he could even get rid of his fickle partner in exchange for someone more loyal and willing to help him survive and thrive in a difficult time. The underlying fragility that Carl faces is similar to the fragility story that plays out all around the world. We've built all manner of fragile systems. Small stressors cascade through those systems. A 1-week shutdown of the global economy would barely make a dent in the world, but a 2-week shutdown can bring economies to their knees. A month-long shutdown can devastate the world. But here's the thing. Every previous economic crisis since the 1980s has shown us how fragile our existing systems really are. And like Carl, our hapless San Francisco resident, we've seen how increasing stress can cause accelerating devastation in these systems. We know we can't pay the metaphorical rent if the wind blows the wrong way. We know our fickle metaphorical partner will abandon us when the going gets rough. We know the metaphorical alcoholism is in the cards. And yet, as a world, and as a culture, and as a society, we do nothing about it. We chug along, hoping, praying we never get that bigger pay cut. And eventually, we're wrong. Eventually, we're hit with something like a coronavirus that spreads through our world and pushes us to our limits.